Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Star Wars fans often take it for granted that the Jedi immediately volunteered for duty during the start of the Clone Wars. It only seemed natural for these servants of the Republic to join the military once the Separatist crisis started and threatened the stability of the galaxy. After all, since the Ruusan Reformation almost 1,000 years ago, the Jedi have filled the gap in between the federal police judicial forces and the local defense forces that patrol each sector of the Republic. Despite having very little military experience or command experience, the Jedi seem to be the perfect individuals to fill in the many command positions in the newly revealed clone army. But if we actually look at the history of the Republic, the Jedi Order has many times refused to get involved with conflicts that the Republic has engaged in. Either because they deemed the actions of the Republic as something that went against the Jedi Code, like during the anti-alien Pius Day Crusades, or like during the Mandalorian Wars. The Jedi at the time had considered themselves peacekeepers and rejected the idea of becoming soldiers. So in today's what-if scenario, we're going to take a look at what would have happened if the Jedi Order stayed out of the Clone Wars. We'll talk about why they would do this, how they would do this, and ultimately what would happen. While many of the younger Jedi were looking forward towards the excitement and adventure they thought war would bring to them, many members of the Jedi High Council were hesitant to join the Republic in their crusade against the Separatist Alliance. The Grand Master Yoda, after the Battle of Geonosis, was visibly worried and upset about the notion of the Jedi joining the war. Then you have even more hardline Jedi like Mace Windu, who had his own reservations. Mace was what you would call a traditionalist, and believed, like the Jedi of the Old, that the Order was designed to be peacekeepers and, again, not soldiers. The difference really between a peacekeeper and a soldier is that a peacekeeper is designed to prevent violence from occurring. Now, a soldier must occasionally use violence and even kill individuals in order to win a war, which in the long run can bring more stability and peace. Mace Windu, a Jedi historian and philosopher, also understood how difficult it was to maintain the Jedi Code when on the battlefield, when chaos and fear are completely in control. For instance, there are a lot of strategic and tactical advantages that a Jedi cannot really use because of their adherence to the Jedi Code, like carrying out preemptive strikes or targeting enemy combatants with artillery or orbital bombardment in heavily populated urban areas. Not using such tactics at the same time could endanger the clones under a Jedi's command, so it created some very uncomfortable situations. Also, it was easy for a Jedi to fall to the dark side after experiencing constant combat, especially for those who were less skilled and therefore more afraid of their own demise and more willing to use the dark side to make sure they survive. Mace Windu also understood that the Jedi Order was way too small to effectively assist the Republic in such a large galactic war. Aside from a few hundred Jedi Knights and Masters, the majority of the Jedi Order was made up of average and not very skilled Jedi who would have a serious problem fighting on these large battlefields and surviving. If we just take a look at the skirmish at Petronaki Arena, out of the 212 Jedi making up the strike team, only about 30 survived against a group of not so impressive B-1, B-2 battle droids and droidicas. So there was definitely a reluctance from the Jedi Council to throw their inexperienced members into what essentially was a meat grinder. And while the Jedi saw themselves as servants of the Republic, their role in government and relationship to the government was a lot less concrete. We can almost look at the Jedi as consultants for the Republic. They were given an extremely long leash by the Republic simply because the Galactic Republic needed the Jedi a lot more than the Jedi needed the Republic. More importantly, the Separatist crisis, which started the Clone Wars, was a much more politically motivated war than previous wars against the Sith, for instance. Negotiations had essentially failed between the Separatists and the Republic Senate and had ultimately led to this conflict. In previous wars against the Sith Empire, the Jedi were ideologically opposed to their enemy, and the Sith were also trying to take over the galaxy, making it a much larger threat and more justified war than the Clone Wars, which essentially was a civil war being fought over taxation combined with a lack of representation. Had the Jedi Order been given more time to really sit down, debate, and think about what it meant joining this war, it's very likely that they would have refused to join in. Now, just because the Jedi didn't join the Grand Army of the Republic doesn't mean that they won't actively be involved in the war in one way or another. Now, it's very likely that the Jedi will start the war as observers and focus more on facilitating and protecting aid and medical care that was being delivered to civilians caught in the war zone. One of the side effects of a galaxy-wide civil war is the complete destruction of essential infrastructure that is supposed to take care of the average person. After the war moved on from a disputed world, it was oftentimes left in ruins and open for picking by scavengers and criminal scum. The Jedi would also, of course, serve in the same role they did before the war as diplomats for the Republic. In the early days of the Clone Wars, many worlds were on the fence about which side they wanted to join. As a matter of fact, tens of thousands of worlds joined the Mandalorian-led Council of Neutral Systems. The Jedi would be obligated to continue their diplomatic mission and approach these neutral systems and try to convince them to rejoin the Republic cause, or at least stay away from the Separatist side. This, of course, would have been extremely difficult, even for a Jedi, because at the time the Separatists had a massive advantage in numbers and resources, and several Republic worlds had been invaded by CIS forces already, and the GAR forces on those worlds were more or less helpless to prevent them from taking it over. Simultaneously, the benevolent and very careful Chancellor Palpatine would accept the Jedi's refusal with the same graciousness and politeness that you would expect from him. But of course, that would all be a farce. Chancellor Palpatine was one of the most talented and manipulative politicians we have ever seen in Star Wars history. His first move would be to use secret channels to encourage some senators to protest against the Jedi's lack of involvement. Palpatine had used a similar strategy when he wanted more executive power so that he could establish the Grand Army of the Republic. At the time, he had his crony Mas Amedda implant the idea into Senator Jar Jar Binks' head. The key thing here is Palpatine must not be seen as the source of this anti-Jedi movement. As a matter of fact, he might even express support for the Jedi's position to seem neutral in the situation. But because Palpatine essentially controlled both sides of the war, he could basically dictate exactly how things went on the battlefield. And as we all know, the Republic did very poorly in the first and second year of the war. And so this anti-Jedi movement would only gain more traction as the JR struggled more on the front. A key part of the movement would be to establish the idea that it was the Jedi's duty to protect the Republic, and without their intervention, more lives were being lost. All Palpatine would really need to do to really increase public outcry against the Jedi would be to increase the amount of massacres and war crimes that the Confederacy committed against Republic civilians. This would force the media outcry to reach a new level, and public opinion would continue to drop about the Jedi, who would be seen as selfish and cowardly for not helping in the war. Palpatine, of course, would be shocked and disturbed by all of these massacres being carried out against Republic citizens, and he would have no choice but to ask and plead the Jedi to help the Republic. Because after all, that's what the people want, and, well, we know Palpatine.
I love democracy.
Now, Palpatine's ultimate goal, aside from destroying the Jedi Order, was to seize control of the very system that put him into power in the first place. Slowly, by using fear, he would circumvent and destroy many of the checks and balances designed to preserve the Republic. It all started with the Emergency Powers Act that he manipulated Jar Jar Binks to bring to the Senate floor. This actually gave Palpatine the ability to bypass the Military Creation Act, which was the Senate's own separate attempt to start a military, which most likely would have been very different from the Clone Army and made up of local defense forces and maybe even drafted civilian fighters. Palpatine definitely would not have been able to drill control chips into these civilian fighters' brains. Palpatine would then follow this by making 4 different amendments to the Constitution, further expanding his emergency powers. One of them was the Reflex Amendment that gave the Chancellor almost absolute power over all military affairs in the Republic. Palpatine would then successfully nationalize the intergalactic banking clans to form a Federal Reserve that could secure him the proper funding so that he could continue to expand the size of the Grand Army of the Republic. Now, by the 3rd year of the Clone Wars, the Jedi were becoming increasingly suspicious of the actions of the Chancellor. Many, including Mace Windu, no longer trusted him. I believe around this point, the Jedi would begin to further distance themselves away from the Republic and their actions in the war. At this point, they probably would be very disapproving of the Chancellor's behavior and his seizure of power. Just like we've seen during the Pies Day Crusades, the Jedi are not formally attached to the Republic. They're more like a long-term consultant that is free to end their contract whenever they like. On top of that, the hostility against the Jedi are growing, and so the Jedi would probably have to retreat more from public view, and perhaps eventually they would even leave Coruscant. Now remember, while this is all happening, you still have your very young and naive Jedi who are perhaps a little bit more hot-headed and actually support getting involved in the war. Just like Revan and his revanchists during the Mandalorian Wars, eventually another Jedi faction would have to emerge that does support Palpatine and the Grand Army of the Republic. And most likely at the head of that new faction would be none other than Anakin Skywalker, the young Jedi from Tatooine who first met Palpatine after the liberation in Naboo and was routinely mentored by the Chancellor while he was a Padawan. We know that Anakin is a very hot-headed individual, very impatient and impulsive, and he loves direct action. We see this all throughout the Clone Wars. He would definitely be pro-joining the fight. At the same time, Anakin had several grievances with the Jedi Order. For one, they technically rejected his application and only accepted him into the Order because it was Qui-Gon Jinn's dying wish. The Jedi also left his slave mother on Tatooine, which led to her being captured and tortured to death by Sand People. Anakin also faced discrimination and bullying from his peers and shade from several Jedi Masters who just didn't trust the young boy. The fact that he was supposedly the chosen one also didn't make matters any easier. And so eventually, a group of pretty young and naive Jedi would follow Anakin and start fighting on Palpatine's behalf. Now, these Jedi would all have a few things in common. Many would see the war as a just war and were willing to even disobey the Jedi Council to fight it. They were most likely less disciplined, less experienced, and probably unaware of what war actually does to an individual. This meant that a lot of them were ripe for conversion to the dark side, especially if their leader, the heroic General Anakin Skywalker, led them into that direction. Sensing the darkness in this new faction of pro-Republic Jedi, the original Jedi Order would have no choice but to declare the Fifth Schism and start another Jedi Civil War in the middle of a galactic-wide civil war. Palpatine would ultimately get his wish and turn the galaxy's opinion against the Jedi. So there you have it, guys. I think this what-if situation is really interesting, and it deserves a little bit more consideration and thought because, again, we often take it for granted that the Jedi Order would just join the Republic in their civil war, which was based on, political fallouts, and also just accept leadership of a clone army that appeared out of nowhere. Very sketchy. Anyway, guys, let me know in the comment section below what you think about this. And also, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. My name is Alan, and if you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.